So,
First of all, go
Oh,
ahead,
it's
please.
okay.
No.
no, so welcome everybody. I hope you picked up the program of work copies over at the beginning of, when you entered the room. If you didn't, of course, the spokesman's office will provide you with a copy of that, and I'm happy to furnish you with one after the meeting. We'll send it over to you. Ambassador Haley, I don't need to introduce her really. We all know who she is, and this room is unbelievably packed. Welcome all. She will begin her press conference talking about the program of work, and then once she's wrapped that up, she'll be delighted to take questions from the media out there. So without any further ado, Ambassador Haley.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say, first and foremost, we've been glued to the news in reference to the Russian event that happened today in St. Petersburg. It's heartbreaking. No matter where this happens, it's heartbreaking. But when you see innocent lives lost in such a senseless manner, it goes back to just enforce why the Security Council is so important, why what we do at the United Nations is so important, and why our priority always has to be focused on those issues. So our thoughts and prayers go out, obviously, to those that were lost and their loved ones at this time. So I'm going to have to remember, and I'm asked that y'all help me with this, is switching on the hat on and off of when I'm Security Council President and when I am in my national capacity. So I'm going to try and get used to that. But if you have any question of which one I'm speaking on, the more respectful and polite one will be the Security Council President, and then the one that's more blunt will be me. So if you have any doubts. But now let's just kind of start with the most important news of the day, and that is that South Carolina won the basketball tournament last night, which I am very, very excited about. I'm proud to say that Clemson won the National Football Championship, Coastal Carolina won the Baseball National Championship, now South Carolina won the Basketball Championship, and if that wasn't enough, we have the #1 golfer, Dustin Johnson, who is doing a fantastic job as well. So I had to put in my South Carolina plug. Now, let's go to the program of work. You'll see basically the same calendar that you see month to month. That is going to stay as is, but what you will see is that we have two thematics that we're going to be pushing. The first thematic is going to be focused on UN peacekeeping. And you've heard me talk about this in terms of the need for peacekeeping reform. I've had numerous conversations with the Secretary General about the need for peacekeeping reform. And the members of the Security Council have very much talked about how they want to see peacekeeping reform. So it is, there is strong consensus on the Security Council that we need to move forward. And the goal is to be effective and efficient through the process, and to make sure we're actually helping the people on the ground, going back and looking at the mandates to see if they actually work, what the political solutions are the governments working with us in terms of getting the aid to the people, and how we're going to revise as needed to make sure we're changing with the times. And so I appreciate the support of the Security Council in terms of the fact that they're very eager about this and want to move forward on that. Also to say, just in the name of transparency, I think it's really important to have as many public meetings as possible. That's just, I've always been a transparency girl, so I think that it's better. So all but 3 will be public for everyone to see. Now, that just means in an open setting. You know, Security Council will be speaking, but it will allow for an open setting in terms of that. And so we will try and maintain that as we go through the monthly calendar. The second thematic we're going to have is in reference to human rights. As president, I strongly believe that if you look at the conflicts we have in the world, they always go back to the human rights issues on the ground within those countries. And with the Security Council and the idea that they are looking for peace and security for the people around the world, it is incumbent on us to look at the conflicts and how human rights related to that conflict. And, you know, if you're looking at Syria and the story of the teenagers and how that set off so much, if you look at the, the fruit stand retailer that set himself on fire in front of the police in Tunisia. If you look at all of these issues, it all comes back to the fact that could we have stopped it sooner? Should we have called out something sooner? Had we done that? You can't help but look at Syria and say, all these things we could have done prior, how do we make sure that we don't go through that process again? So it is not intended to in any way call out certain countries or blast them or use this as a gotcha game. It really is intended to do respectfully, what do we need to watch for? What are the issues that lead to conflict? How do we allow extremism to come in because of the vulnerabilities of the human rights conflicts? And so we think that's incredibly important. You do not see that on your program of work because some of my friends are struggling with that issue still, but we do fully expect to have that on the 18th debate and are working with our friends now to make sure that we can come to a resolution on that. Thirdly, you will see that we are going to have a ministerial. It's going to be on the 28th of April. Secretary Tillerson will be coming in and talking about non-proliferation of North Korea, which is very timely at this time, and we would appreciate the council's support in allowing us to put that onto the program of work as well. And then finally, we're going to have a Middle East briefing that is not going to be so focused on Israel and the Palestinian Authority. We're actually going to talk about the Iranian support for terrorism, the Syrian government, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas, all of the other issues that go along with that, because we think that they are often ignored and not paid attention to. And so that is our goal in terms of the Middle East open debate. So I think with that in mind, that covers almost everything. I will now remind you that being president of the Security Council is intimidating, and it is very busy, and I am still in learning mode. So we are going to try and handle this and represent as best as we can. We appreciate all of you and your kindness and how you've treated me this far. And so now we will open it up to
Before maybe, let's go through the calendar a little bit in terms
The
of other
details?
dates. Yeah, a little bit more details on
I
a
think-
couple of
does any-
dates, unless you guys.
No, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do. This is the same thing you see every single time. I mean, if you
Well,
want me to
then
drag
a
it out,
lot
I
of you-
will, but
Then a lot of you guys are going to get a lot of opportunity. I'm just going to do a little dance up here.
Yes.
Okay, so anyhow, let's start with Sherwin, please.
Ambassador Haley, my name is Sherwin Bryce-Pease. I'm the correspondent for South African Broadcasting. I'm also the president of the UN Correspondents Association, and we have a tradition when we have a press conference here and welcoming you on behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, Madam President,
Thank you,
and,
Sherwin.
and as ambassador. Last week at the Council on Foreign Relations, you called the Democratic Republic of Congo government corrupt. And said that it preys on its citizens. You also said that the UN, through its peacekeeping mission, was aiding a government that is inflicting predatory behavior against its own people. Days later, of course, the MONUSCO mandate was extended by a year. Why is it that the United States voted in favor of that mandate, having sort of implied that the UN peacekeeping mission was essentially aiding a corrupt government, which implies that perhaps they're corrupt as well? Could you clarify, please?
yes, thank you for that question. I think that if you will look at, that's exactly what we're trying to go to with peacekeeping, which is look at the original mandate and see if it's working. The goal with the peacekeeping reforms, and you saw this with MONUSCO, is number one, make sure that we shift. What we saw was it wasn't about more resources. It was about being smarter with the resources. It was about what are we going to do in terms of reporting? Now there's reporting to where we can actually look at the contributing countries and see if we're holding them accountable. The strategic review was very important in September because I think the idea is to be able to go back and actually look and see, are we on the right path? And so much of these peacekeeping missions, I feel like, have been people just assume they're always going to be there. But really, our goal is to make sure they're working for the people on the ground. And so, especially with MONUSCO, if you see so many of the troops staying in their barracks while the civilians are being threatened, that's not peacekeeping. That's not what it's supposed to be. And so what you saw with MONUSCO is what I hope happens with every single peacekeeping mission going forward, which is saying, is the mandate real? Is it something we can accomplish? Are we taking into account the political solution? What are we going to do if the governments don't work with us on this? And are the troops on the ground actually doing the work they're supposed to be doing to help the people in need? And the whole focus at the end of the day will be the people on the ground in need and the reason the peacekeeping mission was started in the first place. So I think MONUSCO was a great first effort. The Security Council all came together on it. I hope that every peacekeeping mission can work in that same direction and do well.
Edie, let's go with you.
Hi, Edie. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. On the human rights issue, there's been a lot of media this weekend on the fact that the administration is leaving human rights out of meetings on Bahrain, on Egypt, on other issues. So it seems sort of strange and interesting that you are here at the UN pushing human rights at a time that the administration seems to be backing away. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Well, I don't think the administration is backing away from human rights because they fully support me speaking about human rights in the Security Council. So what you can look at is with every conflict, there are a lot of different elements. Our number one priority, I am speaking from my national capacity at this point. The number one priority is to really counter terrorism. I mean, when we look at the situation, terrorism in different parts of the world is becoming a huge problem, and we want to make sure we're working with as many friends as we can to defeat it. But at the same time, we want to still be very true to our values, and we want to stay true to what we believe is important. Human rights has always been an important part of what America believes. Human rights is, to me, integral in how a country treats their people and what can cause protests and conflict, and how that can lead on to more serious situations where the extremists can actually come in and take advantage of those vulnerabilities. And so we believe it's very important that we talk about human rights, and the administration has been very supportive of me talking about human rights.
Matthew, go ahead. You're right there.
Sure, thanks a lot.
I thought we don't call him Matthew. I'm just kidding.
He's in the room.
All right, good one. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, thanks a lot. And here's, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access, hoping you'll do stakeouts, not just after the consultations, but as much as possible.
You'll
during the month.
continue to see me.
Okay,
Yes.
great. I wanted to ask about reform. You'd said that maybe the UN shouldn't pay peacekeepers if they abuse the people they're supposed to protect. And I wanted to know just some more specifics. Would this mean individual peacekeepers that have been actually found guilty, or if a contingent has a high percentage of people charged? I'll just use an example. In the Burundian contingent in Central African Republic had 25 people repatriated for sexual abuse, but they're still there. So what would be sort of, how do you anticipate the UN implementing this kind of control? And also in your national capacity, do you think that the UN Secretariat should have a Freedom of Information Act, like duty to respond to requests of how they're spending money to the public, which they could do even without a GA vote, just have basically a practice of saying how money is spent should be disclosed when journalists or citizens asked? Thanks a lot.
So in my national capacity, I will tell you that I have met with the Secretary General on multiple occasions to talk about the contributing countries and how we hold them accountable. I think that their intent is always to do the best they can, but what we have to do is make sure that we have firm reporting on exactly what's happening. And I think it's to both of your points. Individually, we need to know what kind of cases are there and how they were held accountable by by that contributing country, but then also as a percentage with the group if we see this start to be a problem. And I've actually gone a step further and asked the Secretary General if we could sit down and talk to those contributing countries, because I think it's important for them to know what is expected of them. Two, I think they should know that we are going to start a reporting process that we want to engage them on. And then three, at what point do we go and move a contributing country because we don't think they're being beneficial to the process? So I hope that those actions come together. I think that's hugely important in what we're trying to do. And, I think from the peacekeeping reform standpoint, you're going to see this open debate of Security Council members, but it's just the beginning. I hope this is the beginning of many things that we will start talking about when it comes to true peacekeeping reform. It's such a large part of the UN budget. To not really focus on doing that right is going to be very important. In terms of FOIA requests, I'm as open on FOIA requests as anyone. I think that, being transparent and allowing information to go out is an important part of the democratic process. It's an important part to reporting, and I will, my goal has always been not to stand in the way of that.
Richard Ross, CNN.
Ambassador, I'll begin by using the words you may want to hear in 8 years. Madam President,
No.
I have a question for you. Well, that's to be used in these documentaries 8 years from now, at least. I can still be on the air. Two quickies somewhat. Number one, is it true that President Trump offered you the Secretary of State job? You can put on your blunt hat for that answer. And number two, what is the dynamic, the relationship between you and Secretary of State Tillerson? It reminds me of 1993 and Madeleine Albright and Warren Christopher, where you are the dynamic UN ambassador who speaks freely and openly and can criticize anyone you want, and he, being the Secretary of State, doesn't care to talk much to the media, et cetera, and work behind the scenes.
Well, first, I think that we need to acknowledge the bit of media that came out in the past couple of days in reference to my role and what I do. You know, it's amazing. Every position I've ever had, people have assumed that I'm looking towards something bigger, when in reality, I am the daughter of Indian parents who said to me, whatever you do, be great at it and make sure people remember you for it. That's all I'm trying to do. That's all I've ever known how to be, is to try and just do my job to the best of my ability. And if that comes out blunt, if it comes out strong, that's just, I'm one of two brothers and a sister, and my parents raised us all to be strong. And so that's the situation there. I think, I'm going to have to go back to what your question was. What was the second part of the question? I know it was
Did President
Tillerson.
Trump offer you the Secretary of State job?
Yes. Okay. So the Secretary of State position. So the original call that I received to go to Trump Tower was to discuss Secretary of State. No, he did not offer it. It was the discussion that we were having at the time. So when we went in, that was the position that we were discussing. And then thirdly, I see Secretary Tillerson as a great partner. We work very well together, as I do with General McMaster and Secretary Mattis and Secretary Kelly. I mean, it really is a strong group of people who are committed to results. We all know that we each have a place in terms of this administration, but more importantly, we all know that we're working as a team. And so there are not any dynamics that would portray anything other than that. And I've enjoyed working with all of them, and I think they all have a lot to contribute to this administration, and I'm just honored to be a part of that team.
Farnaz?
Good afternoon.
Hello, Ambassador. Hi, Farnaz Fasihi from the Wall Street Journal. I wanted to ask you how you assess your relationship so far after 3 months with Secretary General Guterres and the UN. There's been a lot of talk at the UN among officials that the new Trump administration is a risk and a threat to the UN, from funding concerns to concerns of pulling out of the Human Rights Council to not supporting a two-state solution and climate change. Can you address that perception, at least, that you are a threat, or the administration is a threat?
I think that I don't know what the perception is. What I would want the perception to be, and I think what this administration wants the perception to be, is that we are moving forward with accountability. My job is to show the American people value in the UN. And through that, the way I think that's important is to change the culture of the UN. And that is to not be stale, to start talking about things we haven't always talked about, to look at certain peacekeeping reforms and see if we could do more to help the people on the ground. I know the budget is part of that communication, but I can tell you, in talking with so many other member states, they are happy that we're starting to look at the value of the UN, because I think they all realize that there is a role that we can play that needs to change with the times. And so to look at how this administration's looking at the UN, I would say they're looking at it with fresh eyes. I think they're looking at it to see, where can I show value? Where do we see that it's just not working? What do we want our involvement to be? And the goal right now is that I hope you see leadership from the United States. I think it's very important that all member states know exactly what we're for, know exactly what we're against. When we think something is wrong, we should make it very clear on what we think is wrong, and we should handle it accordingly. And that's the way I think leadership should be, not just from D.C., but also out of New York, and that's what we're trying to do.
Let me take a couple questions from the Arab media, Adla Masood and Talal and Ali. Let's go through. You don't? I thought you had your hand up. Talal?
You're my favorite right now.
What does that make me then?
I don't know. You haven't asked your question yet.
My name is Talal Haj from Al Arabiya News Channel. We heard you over the weekend in your different interviews with Fox and the others, that ISIS, fighting ISIS, is the priority now. If I give you a ladder of priorities, could you just place these priorities in order, how your administration see them? Fighting against ISIS, we understand is the top. Finding a political solution to Syria, holding Assad accountable, and fourthly, fighting the Iranian influence. And fighting ISIS as a priority, would you consider cooperating with the Syrian regime forces to defeat ISIS, or is that out of the question?
Okay, so first of all of those are priorities. And really, there's no way to rank because the White House has made every single one of them. And the only one that you didn't mention was North Korea, because that's also in that list in terms of that. So, you know, Syria is something we're very concerned about. We have no love for Assad. We've made that very clear. We think that he has been a hindrance to peace for a long time. I think he's a war criminal. What he's done to his people is nothing more than disgusting. And so what we're trying to do is say, how do we now work on this? Because we see that we also have, you know, obviously the extremism, ISIS, and trying to counter that. We see Iranian influence that is not helpful. We'd like to see that get out of Syria. And so I think you'll continue to see the U.S. very vocal and very strong as it relates to Syria, because we do want to see peace in that region, and we do want to try and be part of the solution.
And would you cooperate with the government of Syria to defeat ISIS if that's needed?
You know, I think that our goal is to do what we need to defeat ISIS. I don't know that our goal is to talk to Assad in doing that. I think more of what we're leaning on is the conversations in Geneva and how those are all playing out, and then working in that direction as opposed to working in direct. Now, that could change, and the administration could think otherwise, but right now, Assad is not our number one person to talk to. We're looking really at the Geneva talks and being a part of that.
Ali?
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. My name is Ali Barada. I'm from Lebanon. I work for An-Nahar newspaper in Lebanon and for France 24 in France. And my question is about the Middle East session. You said that it's not going to be focused on on Israel as a great or one of the greatest allies of the United States. You said it is Iran and Syria and Lebanon, Hezbollah. On Lebanon, Hezbollah, what do you expect from the Lebanese government, and what do you expect from UNIFIL, the peacekeeping force on the border with Israel, to do with Hezbollah there? Thank you.
So I think our goal with Lebanon is our goal with everyone, which is how can we bring peace and security back to that area? How do we handle the peacekeeping mission when you talk about UNIFIL in a way that's actually productive and working for the people there? And you can pretty much put that in every single region, and we're going to handle it the same way. We think the Lebanon issue is very important. And so that's the whole reason why we want to have those discussed in the Middle East briefing, is we think so much has been put towards Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and not enough has been put towards some of these other issues. And so I hope that they will talk about Hezbollah and what is happening in Lebanon and how we can move forward in that region so that we can start looking at political solutions, because at the end of the day, it's the political solutions that we're all looking for.
What should be done with Hezbollah?
I mean, you know, we want to get rid of any terrorist activity or any extremist groups that are there. I don't know. We'll have to, when we get to that point, I will be able to answer that better. But right now, our goal is just to make sure we're talking about it and getting that out and making sure that it's more of a conversation.
CBC Canada?
Commonwealth, but Melissa Kent, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
Yes.
Thank you. All the way in the back row.
Hi, Melissa.
Hello. I know you've spoken about peacekeeping reform and making sure it's working on the ground, and maybe taking a look at some of the contributions that aren't working, and maybe it's time to switch them, repatriate them. On the flip side, I'd like to ask you, what will you expect from countries who are considering contributing to peacekeeping, and how should they read the likelihood that the UN will need fewer resources in the future?
We really are doing this on a case by, and I say this in my national capacity. We really are looking at this on a case by case basis. And I met with some senators last week to discuss all of this and the role of the UN, and in particular the peacekeeping missions. And the senators were very concerned about are we doing enough to help the people on the ground? Are we being smart about it? It's very much what you hear me talk about is how can we not work harder but smarter? And so, what I hope member states will do is embrace the peacekeeping reform measures we're trying to include into the new way of looking at this and become a part of it. We do want to see member states get more involved in terms of contributions and get more involved in terms of accountability, because we think both of those are extremely important, and we welcome that because we're starting to see more and more issues around the world. We're not seeing them less, we're starting to see them increase. So any participation by member states we think should be increased.
Take a question from a small country called India.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank
My
you.
name is
Which-
Deepak Arora. I'm from New Delhi, India, with the
New
Tribune
Delhi,
Online.
yes.
I'm the diplomatic editor there. I've covered diplomacy for the past 20, 30 years, but I'm amazed by your comments in the past few days. And
Am I not diplomatic enough?
no, of course. And if I could borrow words of President Trump, it seems like you're going to make UN great again. Okay. So coming to terrorism, I saw your tweet on that, and you said you would like to to name countries. Now, our part of the world also has been facing the problem, and President Trump and Prime Minister Modi have talked to each other on this, and terrorism is a big issue. And do you think there have been attempts in the past to name few terrorists in the UN list, but it has been scuttled by another P5 country by a veto vote? I'd like to hear your views on it. How would you like to tackle it as the president of the UN Security Council?
Well, I think that the administration very much is looking at all of these avenues. And some of the things we've talked about is sanctions and who's on the list and how we've managed that. And I think that's part of what we're going to try and find our place with, is that we do want to make sure that we're calling out those that we need to call out. We do want to make sure that we're leading towards a result and not sitting back and allowing things to happen. I think you are obviously seeing a more aggressive administration because we feel like in order to lead, we need to act. And in order to act, we need to make sure that we have those conversations with the National Security Council, and we are having those conversations with the National Security Council. So as we go forward, I think you'll see just in the 2 months, a lot has already happened and a lot will continue to happen, but it is all about how we can make sure we're moving the ball. Are we going to have people that veto certain issues? Yes. But that doesn't preclude the United States from acting, and it certainly doesn't preclude us from trying to see if we can change that as well. So our goal is to get more done together than we do separately. If we can't get it done separately, then we just move in another direction to still get the same things done.
Benny Avni?
Hi, Benny Avni of New York Post and Israel Radio. So a couple of questions on China as she is coming over. President Trump has said if China is not going to solve North Korea, we will. Can you tell us how? And also, speaking of human rights, we've been talking in this country a lot about Russia's violations of human rights. Should we talk a little more about China's violation of human rights? And on the Israel-Palestine thing, Jason Greenblatt has been in the region talking about the regional approach rather than Israel-Palestinian first. Did that receive any echo, any good reception here at the UN with your conversations with colleagues, including the Palestinian ambassador?
Okay, so did you write that down on where he started? I should have
Let's
something
start
to write.
with the sheet.
Yes, so let's start with President Xi then. This visit this weekend will be very, very important, and I think it'll be important at a number of levels. First and foremost, in dealing with North Korea. I think the United States has seen China for 25 plus years say that they're concerned about North Korea, but we haven't seen them act like they're concerned about North Korea. And so I think this administration wants to see them act, and I think they're going to pressure them to do that. And hopefully China will respond favorably. That's what we all want. That's the goal of this weekend, is to make sure that China shows that they are willing to act on North Korea, because we know at the end of the day, the only one that North Korea is really going to respond to is China. So that will be obviously a big part. And then there's obviously a lot of economic things that we need to talk about, but I do think that the way that weekend will go will very much depend on how that conversation with North Korea is, because that is very front and center. I think the president's made it very clear that he needs to see actions from China. I think that we all hope that it's a good conversation this weekend and that we see some real partnership and working together. And so we're all looking at it favorably and hoping that that's what happens.
Will you be there?
I will not be there, no.
And on the Middle East?
On the Middle East. What was your question on the Middle East? I'm sorry. Y'all are going to have to do these one at a time.
Sorry about that. So the,
Israel,
Jason Greenblatt,
Palestinian?
yeah, Israel-Palestine regional approach as opposed to.
So I've been in communication with Jason a good bit in terms of his workings and dealings in Israel and also visiting with the Palestinians. I know that we are strongly working towards a peace agreement between the two areas, but Jason is exploring everything. Again, this is all with open eyes to see what can we do, how can we get things done, and trying to get both sides to bend a little bit. That's been the key, is how do we get both sides to bend towards a common good? And Jason has done great work with that. I think you've seen Jared has done great work with that, and I think you're going to continue to see the president's involvement in that as well. My conversations with the representative of the Palestinian Authority was very much that I told him that we wanted to move towards them coming to the table. I told him that I thought that was extremely important and that our actions were that we weren't going to support the Palestinians' actions here at the UN until they came to the table. We needed to see some genuine willingness to come to the table. The representative responded very well. It was a good conversation, and what I said was we don't want to see any additional measures brought at the UN that would bash Israel or lift up the Palestinian Authority until we can get these negotiations to happen. And I do think the discussions that have happened at the UN have been more of a hindrance towards the peace process than it's been a help, because it's caused defensiveness to happen, and that's never healthy for anything. So our willingness, support, and enthusiasm of seeing an agreement coming from the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis is very important.
While on the topic of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, let's take a question from Israeli media.
Hi, Ambassador Haley. My name is Danielle Ziri. I work for the Jerusalem Post. I'm just wondering, you came out very strongly in favor of Israel and sort of what they're going through at the UN. I know the Israelis are very pleased about that, but are you worried that it puts you in a difficult position to eventually kind of mediate between the two?
I don't worry about that because I've been honest. That's all I've done is tell the truth. And so I've called it out like I see it, and I'll continue to do that. But there's no one that doesn't want to see a peace process between those two bodies. I mean, I think that we all feel like it should happen, it can happen, and we want to see it come together. But no, I don't see any issues with mediating. I just think that I'm the truth teller at the end of the day on what I see and what I think is wrong and what I think is right, and I'll continue to do that.
Now we have a Palestinian in the room as well, so let's hear from you.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. For
Where am I looking?
my name is Abdul Hamid Sayam
right
from
in front
the
of me.
Arabic daily Al Quds Al Arabi, and I have, in fact, many questions.
Yeah, please
Okay.
keep it to one.
Yeah, can
Please
we
be
do?
good to your
let's
colleagues.
just-
There's a big world.
Yeah.
Israel has just announced building a new settlement, not expanding the old ones. And I didn't hear any comment from your side on that. Second,
So I will tell you that the answer to that is that we have said that we do not think it's helpful to continue with settlement expansion. And I did read something where Netanyahu is trying to roll that back so that that's not an issue. My hope is that we have willingness from both sides coming together to really allow for that conversation to take place, but we've been very clear that we don't think it's helpful at this time, and we'd like to see a pause on that.
but one more thing is that 50 years of occupation,
Wait,
Madam
we have to go. You ask the question. Okay. Russia, Olga. Olga, go ahead.
Thanks, Ambassador. My name is Olga Ria Novosti, Russian news agency, and I will have just two questions on Syria. Next week, according to the program, Security Council will have a meeting on political issues. So how do you assess where are the parties of the conflict now after all these meetings in Geneva? And please, the second question, Secretary of State Tillerson last week in Ankara said that the fate or the future of Assad is up to Syrian people to decide. So does it mean that U.S. will accept the participation of Assad in elections? Thank you.
No, it doesn't mean that the U.S. will accept it. It's that we don't think the people want Assad anymore. We don't think that he is going to be someone that the people want to have. But we continue to strongly condemn the actions of Assad and what he has done. And he continues to be directly on our radar in terms of what he does, as well as the Russian and Iranian support of Assad is concerning to us, because when he's doing these things, he shouldn't be praised, he should be called out, and that's what we think is very important. What was the other question? The political process. So we very much support de Mistura and what he's done. I think it's amazing the complexities that he's been having to deal with and the way that he's handled it. And so I think I've met with him 2 to 3 times now to discuss how that political situation is going. And it's why we think the Geneva talks are so important, is because we do think that we have forged new ground and that we can start to at least analyze again where the United States is going to be and how we're going to handle things in Syria.
NHK?
Yes. Thank you, Madam President. I just want to follow up that PKO reform. Secretary General has passed 100 days. And how do you, to the personality on the work of the Secretary General in terms of the peacekeeping operations reform with the United States? Thank you.
I will tell you, the Secretary General has been wonderful to work with. We have a very good, strong relationship. He has been very supportive in the peacekeeping reforms, one, because he's reform-minded himself, and we just agree on how things need to happen. So I feel like we work together as opposed to me saying what I think and him saying what he thinks. We actually think very much alike. So I have enjoyed my workings with him on that. And then we're also talking about other reforms, management reforms that we think could be helpful, and ways to make the United Nations stronger and smarter in the way that it conducts itself. And so I support everything that he's doing, and we continue to meet or talk once a week at least, and we'll continue to do that going forward.
Dawn newspaper, Pakistan.
Thank you very much.
Where am
Madam
I looking?
Ambassador,
Oh, there
my
you go.
name is Masood Haider. I represent Daily Dawn newspaper of Pakistan. As you know, that India and Pakistan have been dagger drawn on Kashmir dispute. And recently, more than ever before, there are human rights abuses in occupied Kashmir. Even when Mr. Prime Minister Modi went day before yesterday to Kashmir, the whole of Kashmir Valley shut down. Can United States make any effort to get these two together to talk peace? Because India does not want to have an interlocutor. Pakistan agrees to an interlocutor that yes, we will accept United States as an interlocutor or any other country, but India doesn't. So what do you think you can do to bring these two enemies together?
I think
Thank
I think it's absolutely right, and this administration is concerned about the relationship between India and Pakistan, and very much wants to see how we de-escalate any sort of conflict going forward. So I would expect that the administration is going to be in talks and try and find its place to be a part of that. We don't think we should wait until something happens. We very much think that we should be proactive in the way that we're seeing tensions rise and conflicts start to bubble up, and so we want to see if we can be a part of that. So I think that will be something that you will see members of the National Security Council participate in, but I also wouldn't be surprised if the president participates in that as well.
Ann, Washington Post, excuse me.
About to give me a promotion there. Ann Guerin from the Washington Post. Madam Ambassador, just back on Israel-Palestine for a moment, seeking a little more precision. The president said that he would like to see Israel slow down a little bit on settlements. Do you believe that the month or so since he said that has shown a slowdown? And what would you like to see in terms of actions from Israel to pave the way for talks?
I think that the settlements that have happened up until now were in response to Resolution 2334, and Israel was going to move forward and do those things. What we have said is that's, let's not do any new settlements. We don't think that's supportive of the peace process. We want to see a pause on additional settlements and find a way that we can get those two to the table. So the fact that they talked about new settlements and the fact that Netanyahu said that they were trying to be responsive to us in pulling those back, I think is a sign of the fact that the Israelis are trying to be conscious of what we're trying to do. And I think that the Palestinians are showing signs that they're trying to be supportive of what we're trying to do. And so, we'll continue to be aggressive on that. You see that whether it's people traveling to the area or whether it's who we have as guests coming to D.C. But our focus is very much to keep strong communication with both parties to make sure that we get to the table and we can start negotiating.
Evelyn?
Hi, Evelyn.
Greetings, Ambassador. Evelyn Leopold, Huffington Post contributor. On the Human Rights Council, is the United States going to stay in? Because they don't just allegedly bash Israel. They bash a lot of other countries. That's the purpose of it.
So what we've discussed is, and what we're looking at is, what does the Human Rights Council do well? What does it not do well? And what would the United States want to see to continue to participate in it? And so I will be going to Geneva in June, and we'll be having those conversations in terms of what we would like to see. And a decision about the Human Rights Council will be made after that at some point. But we are wanting to give them a chance to actually see if they can fall into line with something that we can be a part of. If they don't want to, then that will be our answer. And if they do want to, then hopefully we can work towards some positive changes in the Human Rights Council.
NPR?
Thank you, Jonathan. Ambassador, I have a question regarding Syria. We know that political talks will be going on between the rebels, so-called moderate rebels, and the Assad regime. But excluded from that is al-Qaeda and ISIS. We also know that al-Qaeda has worked with, or are really the good fighters, and have worked with rebels. So I was just wondering, how can a peace agreement really be reached if you only have the two parties? And al-Qaeda, what's going to happen to al-Qaeda and ISIS if indeed only the two sides reach an agreement?
There are no easy answers in Syria. I mean, there's just not. And you can't have black and white answers either. I think we're dealing with different personalities. We're dealing with different goals. We're dealing with different political wills. And then we're dealing with the fact that there is just terrible human atrocities that are happening on the ground. So there is no easy answer with that. I can tell you that what we are doing is trying to look at the political nature of what's happening, deciding who our allies are or going to be, and deciding what we need to do to combat ISIS, because that is a huge priority of ours, and then we'll move forward. I think that's still happening. I think us trying to figure out our place in Syria is still happening, and I think those talks are ongoing now, and I think the U.S. very much wants to play a role in bringing peace to the area, and I think that we will play a role.
Spanish media, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mercedes Gallego with El Correo from Spain. I heard you, Madam Ambassador, saying that you are fully supported by the White House and that you are all working as a team. But from the outside, what we see here also is that while you are pushing human rights issues at the UN, President Trump said this morning, for instance, that President Al-Sisi is doing a fantastic job. And I heard the saying about Erdogan from Secretary Tillerson. The White House is also signing orders that undermine the climate change agreements that the UN have pushed forward. And the budget is also cutting $1 billion on the support of the peacekeeping troops. So how do you square these issues?
Well, I think, America is the country that has always prided itself on valuing all lives and to making sure that human rights is always a part of the conversation. That's not going to change. But when you have different situations that you have to work with certain countries, those friends, sometimes you have to go and you work with them, but then you also say, look, we don't like what you're doing on the human rights level. And we can have both those conversations. It's not one or the other. And I think what's happened in the past is we either say this is a friend or this is not a friend. Right now, on issues we can have friends on, we're going to. On issues we can't, we're not going to. But we're not going to stop talking about human rights as a very important part of what happens, one, at the United Nations, which I think is hugely important, and two, what happens in the international community as it relates to conflict. And so I don't see us at odds at all. I see us very much talking about the topics of the day and what's important. I know a lot of people like to try and find issues, but the White House is very supportive of us talking about human rights because they do value that. And they are very supportive because they do know that there's issues out there. But that doesn't mean they're not going to talk to Egypt, or they're not going to talk to Saudi Arabia, or they're not going to talk to certain actors. Because at the end of the day, what do we all want? We all want to fight, any sort of Daesh, ISIS, any type of extremism that's out there. And so we're going to play with whoever we need to play with to defeat that. But we're not going to stop calling people out when we see something wrong. And so I think that we've been very consistent and will continue to be consistent. But if the president goes and says that somebody's fantastic, fantastic at what? He wasn't talking about human rights. That's why he didn't say the president's been fantastic at human rights. He didn't say that. There's a reason he didn't say that. But those are conversations that we have as well. That's what you do with friends. On climate change, I can tell you that the focus of this administration very much is we don't want to do anything that is going to hurt our businesses. We think that you can walk a fine balance between making sure that you're protecting the environment and also making sure that you are creating a strong economy that allows businesses to function. So we think that that balance can be had. And I think what you saw with the president and what he did was he felt like the previous administration went too far with the regulations and too far in what they were doing against businesses, and he's just trying to balance that back out.
Pam?
Thank you, Jonathan. Ambassador Haley, Pamela
Hi.
Falk from
Yes.
CBS News. My question is a follow-up on the nonproliferation in North Korea. You have the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, coming here. What do you expect? Obviously, some things will happen in Mar-a-Lago, but what do you expect the UN Security Council to do more on North Korea to stop North Korea, given the fact that no one seems to have stopped North Korea yet in terms of testing? And what other heads of or minister level people do you hope to come to that meeting on the 28th? Thank you.
Well, I think a lot is going to depend on what happens between now and the end of the month, because with the conversations that we're having and with the decisions that China will make, that will really spell out where at least the United States wants to go. I know from the Security Council standpoint, we are looking for those foreign ministers to come because North Korea is an issue. It's a threat. I mean, at any given day, we're waiting on another ballistic missile test, and I think that our goal is to say, what do we have to do to stop them? And there is will in the Security Council that has been very supportive of the fact that this is a problem. And so we do need to talk about it in terms of what are we as a council going to do to deal with North Korea, and how do we push that forward. So we hope that we get as many foreign ministers to come as possible. I know it's a serious conversation that Secretary Tillerson wants to have, and it's extremely timely for everything that's going on.
A follow-up. The UN has published a report about so many countries skirting the sanctions, 300 pages worth. How do you expect to follow that up during this meeting?
I think that it's very important, one, that it will be followed up this weekend with the president, with President Trump and President Xi, that, China could be fully imposing those sanctions, and that's obviously what we want to see, but all of the other member states as well. We need to see them starting to actually do what the Security Council said was going to happen, and we need to get more activity from member states outside the Security Council to also be a part of this so that we can talk with one voice. So I do think that Secretary Tillerson's briefing will be very much after all of these things have taken place, and that will dictate how that briefing goes from there.
Can I do a follow-up on that? Yes, it's Rhonda Halbin. I'm a blog columnist and for TOTS for
Rhonda, don't impose yourself on this. Let's be fair to everybody. Italy, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Valeria Robecco, ANSA News West Service.
Where am I seeing you?
Here.
Oh, there you are.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
My question is on Libya. How the U.S. Is planning to act within the United Nations and the Security Council on the situation in Libya and the migrant crisis?
How is the Security Council going to act?
The U.S. within the UN and the Security Council.
I mean, I think that what you're seeing is the U.S. is looking at all of these issues and trying to figure out how we can lift the people back up and lift the situation back up. You know, I want to say that Libya goes back to, if you look at the protests, the peaceful protests they had in Libya, and then you look at the response of the government and how that led into the conflict that we saw, that again is going back to human rights and why we think that's so important. In reference to Libya, we just want to make sure that there's a strong political solution, that we make sure again that extremism is not part of the product that we're looking at. And this is again another thing that the United States will have to look at in terms of how we're going to respond to that. All of this is still a work in progress.
All right, we only have time for 2 more questions. Nick Bryant, BBC.
Ambassador, you raised basketball at the beginning, and it reminded me of something one of your predecessors said, which is this, that to blame the United Nations for the world's problems is a bit like blaming Madison Square Garden when the Knicks lose. I wonder what are your early impressions. Do you see the UN as beset by institutional inertia and a bloated bureaucracy, or do you see talented people and well-meaning people who are continually thwarted by the divisions between member states?
I have been I've been surprised by the United Nations. I've been surprised in some ways where I think the focus has been just so misguided in certain issues like the Israel and Palestinian Authority. I can't believe that they've been discussing that every month of every year for the past 10 plus years. That was very surprising to me when you have so many other issues in the Middle East that need to be talked about. But I've been pleasantly surprised at the kindness and respect that has been here at the United Nations. You very much see that countries send their best and brightest here, and it's all in the name of really wanting peace and security in the world. And I love that. I love that that's what the original intent is, and that's very much what they're trying to do. What you do see at the United Nations, and when you hear me talk about trying to change the culture of the United Nations, it's only because what has happened to this organization is the same thing that happens to every organization. They get stale over time. They forget. They spend more time talking and less time acting. And so we're just trying to remind them that actions is the goal of the Security Council and the United Nations, and actions towards the greater good is the goal, and make sure that we're showing value. I think that the United Nations for a long time has gotten into habits, and old habits sometimes are hard to break, but I'm seeing a lot of support of breaking those habits, whether it's how much they focus on Israel, whether it's the fact that, we want to get away from the talking and get to more actions, whether it's the fact that how they came together with MONUSCO and really started the peacekeeping reform process in a way that was productive, or the fact that, we're hopefully going to see human rights on the debate as well. But I do think that there is value that I am determined to show from the United Nations. But in order to do that, everyone has to participate. All member states have to be a part of that change in culture and change in process. And if we do that, I think that there is no end to what this United Nations can do, because it is a great place of diplomacy, even though some of us are not as diplomatic as others. But it's also a place where I think we can come together in a room and talk about issues without there being so much pressure of what's going on in the region.
She was so succinct on that one. Margaret, we can take a question from you, Nabil, and Errol, and that should wrap it up, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Margaret Bashir with the Voice of America. Just a slightly different variation on Nick's question. You've said a lot about what you don't think works at the UN. Could you just tell us what you think does work? And is there any area of the organization's work that is safe from budget cuts from this administration?
I think there's a lot of areas at the UN that work, and that's why I talked about the diplomats that are sent here from other countries and how impressed I am with them, and how impressed I am with their willingness and their care and their belief to do good so it's not the people. I think that you're dealing with all the right elements. It's the actions that we're trying to change. And so I do think that if you're dealing with these people, there's conversations that we need to have that we're not having. So we'll start having those. And I've seen nothing but support from other people saying, we do need to do this, or we do need to start acting more, or we do need to start talking about things and not have the same talking points. So I see a lot of opportunities here at the UN. I know that everyone wants to focus on the budget, but you have to understand the budget discussion, it was bigger than just the numbers you want to talk about. The budget discussion was about the fact that the United States very much wants to put the military first. Strengthening the military, strengthening the equipment when it's been so depleted over the years is something that the president wants to see. The second thing the president wants to see is anything else that's there, are we finding value in it? Can we make it work? How can we make it work? So if they're looking at the United Nations, I don't see that as a threat at all. I see that as asking for more accountability and asking for more things to change. And all of that's doable here at the United Nations. All of that is possible because we're seeing that, whether it's been with the peacekeeping reform. We're seeing that whether it's the silly Israeli report that came out last week and the fact that that came down. We're seeing that with the way the Security Council is adopting this program of work and moving forward. I think we're seeing that overall in the energies and the anxiousness and the accountability that we're seeing all member states want. And so we're going to continue moving in that direction. And I am constantly in contact with members of Congress who want to see the same thing. They want to see value in the UN. They want to know that we're not just constantly being pushed around in the UN, and that we're actually valued for being the host country, and that we're valued for what we're trying to bring, and that we do give a lot of money to the process and to the international community as a whole. And no one wants to be taken for granted. I don't think that's too much to ask. I think it's just saying, are we appreciated? And if we are appreciated, how do we get it to work to where it works better for everybody? And that's the goal, and I think that's the one we'll achieve.
Okay, Nabil and Errol, and then the ambassador has a meeting at 4, so she's got to hightail out of here. So go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Nabil Abi Saab, Al Hurra TV station. You've been talking about Iran and Iranian influence in Syria and the Middle East in general. Since day one, actually, you mentioned Iran in your first appearance here in the UN. And I would like to know if there is any action you're planning to take on this. You have a lot of tools in the Security Council on terrorism, on Iran, on Yemen, Syria, etc. Are you planning to do a certain action, take a certain step on this regard, or how would you translate your position on Iran?
I mean, I have always been clear, at least on what I think, that Iran is definitely the main state sponsor of terrorism. It's something that we find is a problem in every area they try and put their influence. And so that's something that we want to deal with. And I think as the National Security Council meets on these issues and goes through these issues, we will deal with Iran in different ways in different places. But the goal is very much to move that influence out of the way. We don't see it productive, we don't see it helpful, and we see it being harmful to the world. And so as long as that is happening, we're going to continue to call them out and show where and when they're being a bad actor, but we're also going to look at what actions we can do to change that behavior and to get others with us on our side to move collectively towards Iran.
Errol, last question, please.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Ambassador Haley.
Yes.
I'm Errol Avdovich, representing Western Balkan media here for quite some time. My question is, we've heard you on Russia talking very clearly on the sanctions to state. However, I would like to hear from you recently, just a couple of days ago, actually, U.S. Senate approved the support for Montenegro for NATO. And I would like to hear your thoughts on that, and also to update us on your position on Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And also, are you going to, just to ask you this, are you going to,
you got to stop with all the questions.
Yeah, are you going to attend UN Security Council meeting when the Kosovo and Bosnia are on the agenda, since your predecessor was mainly absent on those?
So we're going to get you answers to all of those questions, and you will get it on one sheet of paper, and Jonathan's going to take care of it. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.